Okay, everyone, welcome back to Well-Being Part 2. We sunk our teeth into my necessary ethical constraint last session, and that is well-being as a necessary constraint. We went through what I mean by well-being, how and why I use that concept in the way that I use it, in that well-being should mean, if we are to look at how it is used in our highest schools of learning that are tasked with better understanding and mastering the human condition towards a better human condition. We always must reference physical, mental, and social health. So whenever I say maximize well-being, I'm talking about maximizing physical, mental, and social health. If you didn't catch the first session, I hope you go back and watch the first session. We went through so many great topics within the second chapter of the book, which is titled Well-Being. We started with the human condition of well-being. And of course, we talked a lot in that section about how so many conceptualizations of well-being have failed throughout human history because there was either too much ignorance about what we are as physical beings, or it wasn't included. And if we aren't prescribing well-being at the right level, at the grounding level of what it means to feel well in the world, then we're missing we're missing the whole foundation of what gives rise to us being able to be productive and pursue our purposes without feeling like our engines aren't working for us. So we then went into what well-being is and why it must be grounded. We talked about the Pangburn well-being maxim, which is my moral quest: maximize well-being for yourself and those around you. We talked about the pressure of my moral quest. It is a command of sorts. It's not a question. It's not a, when you feel like you can, or when you feel up to it, or if you have time, maximize well-being for yourself and those around you. No, it is a moral imperative. The good life must be maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you, at least. This is a constraint all moral systems must have. They must consider, care for the well-being of humanity. We went through taxonomic clarification, the conceptual organization of where well-being ought sit in philosophical terms, so that we can avoid category errors. And like I have said already, it is a normative constraint. It ought to be used as a constraint on all normativity. We talked about, or we finished with, a brief history of well-being in moral thought. And we went through ancient philosophy, ideas from Aristotle of eudaimonia, this idea of a life lived in accordance with reason and virtue. Aristotle didn't have. Aristotle was the founder, I would say, of empiricism, but he, of course, didn't have the beautiful scientific modeling that we have to work with nowadays as moral well-beingists to be able to say and do much more based on the biological reality of well-being, the facts about well-being. So, and that brings us to today, where we must talk about this section, and it's a big section, lots to talk about, and I know Thomas has a lot of deep interests in this section, and it is going to be biological and psychological constraints on well-being. As always, I'm going to start with some reading. Now, the reading I'm using here, it's not direct prose from the book. There are little sections I've organized and put together to make sure you kind of get a taste of what that section in the chapter will be like. It's not there's some of the actual lines and prose are here, but it's not, we're not hearing a final draft. Okay. Perry, Thomas, how are you guys doing? Are you ready?
Ready and willing, sir.
Fantastic. How you doing, Perry?
Yes, sir.
He might be having problems with his unmute.
He dogged it up. Oh, he is having problems.
All right. Well, we'll check in with Perry in a minute after we're done here. So let's go. Any moral framework that treats well-being as infinitely negotiable has already departed from reality. Human flourishing is constrained long before values, goals, or intentions enter the picture. Bodies fatigue, nervous systems saturate, minds narrow under threat. These are not failures of character, they are features of the organisms we are. Pangburnian well-being begins by taking these constraints seriously. Human biology imposes non-negotiable requirements. Sleep is not optional, recovery is not indulgence. Stress cannot be overridden indefinitely by motivation or meaning. When these limits are violated, performance may persist for a time, but stability does not. Damage accumulates quietly and surfaces later as illness. We have emotional volatility and collapse. Moral narratives that celebrate endurance while ignoring this accumulation are misleading. Psychology adds another layer of constraint. Human attention is limited. Emotional regulation is effortful. Belief formation is influenced by fear, identity, and social pressure. Under chronic stress, people become more rigid, more reactive, and less capable of reflective judgment. This has direct implications for the well-being maxim. A person who is biologically depleted or psychologically dysregulated is less able to maximize well-being for themselves or anyone else, regardless of intent. Importantly, these constraints interact. Sleep deprivation amplifies anxiety. Chronic stress impairs memory and judgment. Social isolation worsens both physical and mental health. Well-being is therefore not modular. You cannot sacrifice the body to save the mind or sacrifice the mind to save others. without eventually paying costs across the entire system. This is why Pangburnian well-being rejects moral frameworks that treat limits as obstacles to overcome rather than signals to interpret. Pain, exhaustion, and emotional overwhelm are not moral failures, they are information. Ignoring that information does not make one virtuous. A common objection is that emphasizing constraint risks lowers moral ambition. If people are always limited, why ask more of them? This objection confuses realism with resignation. Pangburnian well-being does not ask less of people, it asks more honesty. It demands that moral effort be calibrated to what human systems can actually sustain. One more objection. It will claim that constraint talk excuses laziness or self-indulgence. This too misunderstands the framework. Pangburnian well-being does not sanctify comfort. It distinguishes between restorative limits and avoidant habits. The difference is not rhetorical. It shows up in long-term outcomes. Practice that restores functioning expand moral capacity. Practices that numb or evade it shrink that capacity. Biological and psychological constraints are therefore not peripheral to the Pangburn moral quest. They are central. Any attempt to maximize well-being that ignores them will predictably fail, no matter how noble the intention. Well-being does not begin with ideals. It begins with limits. Now, I'm gonna bring in Perry and Thomas first, but we will also get into a little bit in depth on the psychology of well-being. But maybe first, Thomas, what are your thoughts?
Oh, Lord have mercy, I could go forever.
Good.
So, I agree with everything that you said. It is based on constraint. I mean, it's degrees of freedom within the constraints in which we find ourselves. We are embedded in the very constraints in which we live. And so, we can only expect out of people their capacities based on their degrees of freedom, based on these constraints in which we live. And so psychology is there for us to understand that so that we can live the most healthily. And mental health is one of the three triune pieces of well-being for Travis and I. And I'll speak for Perry as well. So, I don't even know if I want to say too much more at this juncture because that was really good. So I just want to agree very strongly. I'd like to see Perry's opinion on it, though.
Yeah, Perry, go ahead, and then we'll get into a little more of the scientific modeling of well-being, if Perry's with us here. Let's see. He sent me a message, but I don't want to open it on my
maybe kind of technical difficulties. I can talk it out with you, whatever you want to do.
I'm just going to double check the message.
Here he is.
Yo. So, how's it going, first of all?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Did you catch
Fine.
the first section?
So, well, I heard, at least 60% of it.
Okay.
What seems to be a common kind of theme in at least the first two chapters so far is constraints and limitations, which if my induction and inference serves correct, I have a feeling that we're going to bring that up in all of the chapters for communication, lightheartedness, patience. So the limitation thing is a real important thing for at least these two so far. When one of the systems goes, the other one inevitably does too, which it sounded like you were hinting at. You can't sacrifice one of them to satisfy the body or vice versa. It's no doubt a holistic harmonized kind of system,
Yeah.
well-being.
The example that comes to mind, I'm sure we can come up with many examples, is the person who works themselves physically to death in order to satisfy this ideal of themselves as the provider for their family. Now, there are many tales, heroic tales of how heroic that approach to one's work and or habits is, if it really is maximizing the well-being of those around us, in this case, the family. But what effect is this level of work having on the mind, on the mental health? What level of effect is this having on the social health of the individual? Are they still having time for their friends, or are they working themselves to death under the false notion that this is the good life? I would say it is not, because they are making grave sacrifices in this particular version, this particular
The
hypothetical.
number one killer constraint of all this is stress. You are
Yeah.
literally describing exactly
Yeah.
what stress does to the human race.
Yeah. So what kind of balance is being struck here? What kind of negotiation is happening? And is there a realization of what this is doing to the well-being of the individual? And
This is like right down Thomas's wheelhouse. I'm sure there's some good psychological data for the physical, mental, and social effects and if I may, before you do that, Thomas, it also reminds me how men have gotten this idea, or whoever the breadwinner is in the house, that they do have to sacrifice their health in order to win the bread. And there's so many of these kind of old ancient teachings, fathers who will hit their sons to toughen them up, because they think that somehow will attribute to their mental well-being and make them tougher in a way. But we have great evidence against this.
Yeah, or people will also like wish hard times on their children, because those are how one must be cemented and grounded in reality in order to face trials and tribulations in the future. There's a lot of these ancient like parenting techniques that I think have run their course, more so as we discover more about the psychology of well-being. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
This is so important to what we do and what we're trying to spread as well-being and cultivate well-being, is because it all starts from developmental psychology, guys. It all starts from there. And,
yes. So I have a lot of things to go through here quickly, and Thomas, I know you're going to have responses to this. So let's go through the psychology of well-being. I'll go through a few quick categories here, and if you have anything to add, I want to read this into the record so that we
go ahead. I'll stay open.
Yeah. So we have our two core traditions. Hedonic well-being focuses on pleasure, comfort, and positive emotions. Some key ideas in that tradition are happiness, life satisfaction, minimization of pain. Then we have the eudaimonic well-being, which is a focus on meaning, purpose, and realizing one's potential. The ideas involved in this tradition are growth, values, contribution, coherence. And most modern models treat well-being as kind of a balance between these two traditions.
I agree with that.
So we have the major psychological models here. A lot of you will be familiar with PERMA, positive psychology, so positive emotion, engagement, or flow, relationships, meaning, accomplishment. You're familiar with the PERMA model, Thomas?
Very well, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
all of those older frameworks that are now being subsistently replaced by neuroscience personality psychology, which is
Yes.
much more accurate and modern.
Right. Self-determination theory, SDT. So well-being increases when three basic needs are met. This is broken down by autonomy, competence, relatedness. And this is a bit on, so, some of this stuff is still subscribed to. Some is moving on in a bit different directions, like Thomas just outlined.
Yep.
Psychological well-being, are the RIF model. So the 6 pillars: autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relations, purpose in life, self-acceptance. Now let's look at the role of cognition. How we interpret experiences strongly affects well-being. So we're going to be engaging in appraisal, what events mean to us, belief flexibility, updating rather than rigid certainty, emotional regulation, responding, not suppressing. This is why therapeutic approaches often target thinking patterns and not just circumstances.
Correct.
So social and environmental factors. Well-being is not just internal. We've talked a lot about the kind of third pillar of well-being being social health. I would say I would say that pillar gets ignored probably the most in
Yes.
most people's interpretation, or most people's how they spread out what energy they have to serve their well-being. Physical and mental are always so important, and they're always at the forefront of most discussions. But the social well-being element is just perversely ignored or underrepresented. And it must be as represented, I would argue, as social creatures as the other 2 pillars, just as important.
Yeah. In studying,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go.
I was just saying, in studying effective neuroscience and everything, modern personality psychology, everything you're reading off, I don't like the models. They are not fluid and expansive and hybridized enough.
Right.
To be of true help in a very dynamic, complex existence. So the way that I look at it is, personality is not necessarily who a person is. It's how a person's nervous system, learning history, and values currently organize behavior under the current constraints that we're in.
Right.
And it's always conditionally changeable and defeasible, updatable.
Yeah.
And this is what neuroscience has taught us about personality. That understanding all of that leads to social health, because you can understand others. You have an awareness of self and other, and you realize that keeping yourself alive requires keeping the people you love and are around you alive, that are in your life. That all ties together. There is no separation.
And thriving.
Yeah,
and thriving
yes.
as well.
Yeah, we can do both things there. We don't have to
Yes.
say, I've just got to do one or the other. That's why when you read the well-being model a minute ago, the eudaimonia and the other one, I was like, that is already, to me, both,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but yeah.
So well-being is not just internal, like we talked about. Secure relationships matter more than income past basic needs. Chronic stress, instability, or lack of safety erode well-being. Culture shapes what the quote-unquote good life looks like. So it's important to keep in mind that human well-being is deeply, deeply, deeply relational. Flow and engagement. People report peak, and remember, we're talking within the school of psychology now. So we are kind of just doing an aside, because this is the cognition cognition section of the chapter. We're just taking an aside to read this information into the record here, because we are recording, and this information will be used when assessing certain aspects of the book. So flow and engagement. People report peak well-being when the challenge is equal to the skill. Attention is fully absorbed. Self-consciousness drops. Time distortion occurs. Flow isn't relaxation, it's deep participation. And Thomas, you and I have talked a lot about being in the flow state.
Flow is extraordinarily
Yeah.
important for a human being to be inside. We dance through life in a lot of metaphorical ways, and in some ways you could even say literally. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a really cool thing. Theater, music, art. And we'll
Yeah.
get to that later.
Yeah, theater, music, art. For anyone that plays a musical instrument who's engaged in improvisational music and jamming, you know, you can really enter the flow state doing that. When I'm in a scene with somebody in theater with another actor, that is just pure flow state for me. So, yeah, common threats to well-being from a psychological perspective: chronic uncertainty without agency, social isolation, meaning collapse, learned helplessness, over-identification with rigid beliefs or identities. It's amazing, this particular section, the common threats to well-being, how much fallibilism covers there. And this is when we get to the synthesis chapter of how all of the Pangburn virtues work together, we're hopefully going to eliminate almost all common threats across the board, not just psychological, but, you know, chronic uncertainty without agency. This speaks to one's relationship and praxis of fallibilism. It's very important. What psychology consistently finds across cultures and methods, relationships tends to mean more than wealth after basic needs are met. Meaning buffers suffering. Flexibility beats certainty. Hell yeah. Agency beats control, and contribution strengthens identity. And just a final unifying insight here. Well-being is not about constant happiness psychologically. It's about functional alignment between your values, your environment, your relationships, and your capacity to adapt. Flourishing is dynamic, not static. Perry, anything pop up for you while we were going through the science taxonomy there?
Yeah. So at the end there, you know, I frame everything through a Socratic or Nietzschean hermeneutic. So when I'm interpreting this, I get flashbacks to, in this case, Socrates, who's, you know, more or less of a virtue ethicist, broadly speaking, will say, don't focus on things like wealth before your body and your mind and your health. Focus on the virtues, which for him ultimately lead to justice, which is essentially health and well-being, the way that we're using it. If you follow all of those virtues, then you will receive good relationship statuses with your friends, wealth, and all of those things, including the basic necessities. So that's one thing that was running through my head. I guess you're right that fallibilism covers many of those issues that you brought up, uncertainty, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And an important,
that's about it.
Okay, great. Fantastic. And an important thing about, believing in your fallibilistic nature, or the believing in the value of the prescription, is not enough. You need to act fallibilistically. The praxis matters. We are about to move into the section on well-being praxis. I think we have a section before that, but it's just the human experience is action. We are actionable. So the praxis, how to act in the world when it comes to the virtue of well-being, the maxim and the virtue of fallibilism. What does that look like in your day-to-day behaviors, personal relationships, and so on. Go ahead, Perry.
I think theory is only good if it conduces to its praxis. We could even bring up the whole limitations and feasibility thing. If your theory goes far beyond the limitations of what we can or cannot do, its praxis is going to be dog poop.
Right.
So the theory, as well as the praxis, if we're going the other direction, the praxis ought conduce to the theory, and kind of a feedback loop type thing.
Yes. And look, praxis is unavoidable at very small scales. Like if your beliefs do inform your actions. But there is a difference between knowingly pursuing fallibilism in your life than just knowing you believe that you are a fallibilistic being and that we ought be fallible. These are different things. There are variations, peaks and valleys of praxis. So let's first, before we get on to the praxis of well-being, let's just examine the internal structure of Pangburnian well-being for a moment. And we're going to get into physical, mental, and social health, the three subcategories of Pangburnian well-being. If well-being is to function as a serious moral constraint rather than a vague aspiration, it must have internal structure. Without structure, quote, maximize well-being collapses into rhetoric. Pangburnian well-being avoids this collapse by identifying three interdependent domains that together determine whether a human life is functioning sustainably: physical, mental, and social health. These are not independent modules. They are interacting systems. Damage in one domain propagates into the others. Stability in one domain supports resilience elsewhere. Any attempt to isolate one while ignoring the rest produces partial success at best and hidden failure at worst. Physical health concerns the integrity and regulation of the body. It includes sleep, nutrition, movement, recovery, and freedom from preventable injury and disease. Physical health is not about optimization or aesthetic ideals. It is about viability. When physical systems are chronically compromised, cognitive capacity narrows, emotional regulation weakens, and social participation becomes harder to sustain. No moral framework can override this indefinitely. Mental health concerns the stability and flexibility of psychological functioning. It includes emotional regulation, attention control, tolerance of uncertainty, and the ability to reverse beliefs without identity collapse. Pangburnian mental health is not defined by constant happiness or absence of distress. It is defined by the capacity to remain responsive to reality under pressure. When mental health degrades, judgment becomes reactive, and the well-being maxim becomes difficult to enact even with good intentions. Social health concerns the quality of relational and institutional environments. It includes trust, reciprocity, role clarity, and the ability to navigate disagreement without breakdown. Social health is not about popularity or harmony. It is about reliability. When social systems erode, individuals experience chronic stress. Even physically and mentally resilient individuals eventually degrade in socially hostile environments. The Pangburn well-being maxim applies across all three domains simultaneously. Maximizing well-being for oneself while ignoring social harm violates the maxim. Maximizing collective outcomes while sacrificing individual physical or mental stability also violates it. The internal structure of well-being therefore enforces balance, not equality, and sustainability, not intensity. So one more time with that. The internal structure of well-being therefore enforces balance, not equality, different things, and sustainability, not intensity. A common mistake is to treat one domain as morally primary. Some frameworks prioritize physical endurance, others elevate psychological insight, still others focus almost exclusively on social justice or cohesion. Pangburnian well-being rejects this hierarchy. Priority shifts by context, life state. Let me start that again. Priority shifts by context, life stage, and circumstance, but persistent degradation in any one domain is a warning sign, not a virtue. So one more time with this. Priority shifts by context, life stage, and circumstance, but persistent degradation in any one domain is a warning sign, not a virtue. Another mistake is to confuse trade-off with justification. Short-term sacrifices may be necessary. Chronic damage is not. The internal structure of well-being gives us a way to distinguish between adaptive strain and pathological erosion. Strain that expands future capacity may be justified. Strain that predictably shrinks it is not. This structured view also guards against moral romanticism. Suffering does not automatically confer depth. Exhaustion does not automatically signal commitment. Social conflict does not automatically indicate progress. Pangburnian well-being demands evidence that costs are buying something real rather than merely being endured. I'm going to read this section again slowly, and we did talk about this a little bit in our example about how one could, physically sacrifice themselves at work to provide to their family to such a high level of, let's say, suffering. And this can be looked at as moral romanticism. Oh, that's so romantic and good in such a difficult way, but you see that they're striving to do better for their family. It's a very attractive norm, but I think it's primitive moral philosophy. So one more time, this structured view also guards against moral romanticism. Suffering does not automatically confer depth. Exhaustion does not automatically signal commitment. Social conflict does not automatically indicate progress. Pangburnian well-being demands evidence that costs are buying something real rather than merely being endured. That costs are buying something real rather than merely being endured. Physical, mental, and social health together from the minimum architecture within which moral life, physical, mental, and social health together form the minimum architecture within which moral life can occur without collapse. They are not the point of life, they are the conditions that make a life capable of having a point. So, Thomas and Megawavy, what do you think about the internal structure of Pangburnian well-being, the three subcategories? Does physical, mental, and social health cover it for the human condition within the concept of well-being? Are we missing anything? What are your thoughts?
No, that is entirely conclusive. I mean, for humanity right now, with the best current reason and evidence, Everything you laid out about physical, mental, and social health is backed up by paper after paper after paper. Um, those are the three pillars. If there's anything else, we will find it in the future if we keep trying and be courageous. And we will cultivate better means of it and farm that, right? But what you mentioned a moment ago was self-martyrdom.
Yeah.
That is in the Christian culture a lot. That is a big part of also in Islam and a few other religions around the world. Self-martyrdom, martyrdom for public's sake, if that makes sense, for social's sake, because a lot of those people, like you and I have talked before, hey, I'm working harder than you. Is that for them
Right.
or is that for others?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It gets really wild when you look. That's why these things that are philosophically self-evident are also socially evident. And
Yes.
so this is another step of this where we have to be like, okay, social health is obviously tied to mental and physical health because other people have mental and physical health that directly interconnects with yours and affects it.
Well, and talking about sacrifice, and it was great, Thomas, that talking about sacrifice for a moment, like look at what we sacrifice for social health purposes, our lives. We go to war to preserve social health, obviously to preserve the well-being of ourselves and those around us, but on very large scales, we go to war to preserve social health. And this is sometimes necessary. The moral quest to maximize well-being for yourself and those around you will, under certain circumstances, call you to war. And that could be war on a small scale. We could view the call to war in an example of like, some guy is stealing your grandmother's purse, and you have to engage them in a physical altercation to get the purse back and hold them and wait for authorities to arrive so that they can meet some justice. Now, in these examples of being at war, I don't think, even though we are going to do some calculus to understand what we would consider righteous killing and wrongful killing, we are going to engage in that calculus. But we must not forget the preservation of well-being while we are engaging in such calculus. Just because we are at war, the Pangburn maxim should not leave our lips. Our efforts should still be to be maximizing well-being for ourselves and those around us. And sometimes to do that, we must engage in justified, rightful, I would say, killing. World War II is an example. There are particular instances, the bombing of Dresden being one, where this was unnecessary if we are engaging in this moral maxim and well-being calculus. Unrighteous wasn't necessary to end the war. It was payback from Great Britain on Germany. So we ought not stop engaging with this calculus even when we are called to engage in what we view as righteous killings.
Yes. This is the nature of humanity. Some aberrations in evolution are going to cause us to have to, there's no way to get away from something like this, sadly, because we can't. Technology's not there yet. Ethics and society aren't there yet. We will get there if we keep trying. I know we will. But I would love to hear what P-Dog thinks.
Yeah, go ahead, Perry.
Yeah, social health and well-being seems to definitely be underrated. at least relative to the two others. You become socially isolated for whatever reasons, personal, cognitive, just the environment, and you'll notice a whole slew of mental and physical ailments. You start, spitting blood, and you get fevers and a sore throat every other week, and you're like, holy shit, why is my physical falling apart? And it could be because one of the other parts of well-being is compromised. I am running a little low on mental ATP today, but so I'll say another Socrates-ism. The city is like the man. So when there's one thing wrong with your body or your mind, the other parts of your body and mind are going to suffer as well. Same goes with the city. When there's something wrong in the city and something's not harmonized properly, it's going to go to shit. So that's my one cent on the matter.
Very good. Thank you, Perry. And it's something to think about here too is when we are assessing, let's say you're an emperor or a president, assessing the well-being of your society, the social sphere. We are often looking at physical and mental well-being outcomes and measurements. So again, we just continue to demonstrate over and over again that these categories, these subcategories of well-being, physical, mental, and social health, are not monoliths. They are connected by necessity due to our nature. To look at them as monoliths is a mistake. And this is why, like if we examine medicine, a physician, it would be insanity to look at a patient only through the lens of biological matter and make no reference or not even notice the presence of the mind. We would consider this to be negligent doctoral care. Just as it would be negligent if someone was having an emergence of generalized anxiety and the social situation, the interpersonal relationships, the relationships at work, for example, are not at least questioned when assessing the place at which this anxiety is arising or the cause for it. So again, we look to physicians, we look to medicine, we look to medical science to be our guides in better understanding the empirical nature of the human condition, which there are a seemingly infinite amount of facts about. This is something that many people will try to argue against you, that modeling of well-being or well-being moral modeling, it's just all subjective, man. You just make it up. The grounding here is the actual facts about well-being. The effect a broken bone has on your life, on your mind, these are facts. It is a fact that the bone is broken. It is a fact that you are enduring particular kinds of social detriments because of the broken bone. You can't play in your hockey game anymore, for example. These are just facts. The grounding here is fact-based. Yes, it is true that you have to presuppose well-being as a moral metric. You have to accept it fundamentally based on how you feel about well-being as a moral metric. I'm not saying that the is-ought gap is breached here, because it is not. But if you accept well-being and a clear, discernible subcategory section of well-being, then I think it is our best chance at achieving some of the most basic achievements in life, like living instead of dying, being well instead of sick. Almost everyone of sound mind wants to still be alive. Almost everyone of sound mind wants to be well instead of sick. There aren't many people signing up to be injected with illnesses. So to deny the constraint of well-being on whatever your moral calculus is to be in the wrong direction if you are truly in pursuit of the good life. Let's move on to, I always have the most fun, I think, discussing praxis. Praxis, the praxis of well-being. Well-being in action. What does it mean to live by the Pangburn well-being maxim, to maximize well-being for yourself and those around you? Okay, a bit of reading, and then we will open up some discussion again. If well-being remains a belief rather than a practice, let me read that again. If well-being remains simply a belief rather than a practice, it will not survive contact with life. Good intentions do not stabilize bodies, regulate minds, or repair relationships. Only patterns do. Pangburnian well-being, therefore, insists on praxis. Not performance, not identity, practice. Praxis begins with attention. People often harm themselves and others, not out of malice, but out of inattention to slow damage. Exhaustion is tolerated because it is familiar. Emotional volatility is excused because it is situational. Relationship strain is postponed because it is inconvenient. The first practical demand of the well-being maxim is to notice what one's life is actually doing, rather than what one hopes it represents. This attention must be longitudinal. Pangburnian praxis does not ask how a choice feels today. It asks what it predictably produces over time. Does this pattern restore capacity or erode it? Does it increase clarity or reactivity? Does it strengthen trust or quietly tax it? Short-term belief that produces long-term fragility is not neutral. It is counter to the maxim. Praxis also requires calibration rather than intensity. Many people equate seriousness with extremity. They overwork, over-sacrifice, or overcorrect in bursts that cannot be sustained. Pangburnian well-being favors boring consistency over heroic effort. Again, Pangburnian well-being favors boring consistency over heroic effort. Small practices that protect sleep, regulate stress, and maintain relationships often do more moral work than dramatic interventions that collapse under their own weight. Another central feature of praxis is boundary setting. The well-being maxim does not demand infinite availability. This is something I hear a lot from people like, oh, you just expect me for every second of every day and while I'm sleeping and to constantly be thinking, I must maximize well-being for and going around like a robot. No, the well-being maxim does not demand infinite availability. It demands sustained contribution. Boundaries are not selfish when they preserve the capacity. So you're not being selfish. You're not all of a sudden not living the good life if you are setting boundaries. That can be demonstrated to preserve capacity. They are a form of moral maintenance. People who refuse to set limits often do not become worthy or saints in their pursuit of the good life. They become brittle or absent. Pangburnian praxis also treats repair as a first-class moral activity. So again, Pangburnian praxis also treats repair as a first-class moral activity. Mistakes are inevitable. People misjudge trade-offs. They push too far. They neglect what mattered. The question is not whether harm occurs, it is whether it is acknowledged and addressed. Repair restores trust. Refusal to repair compounds damage. Importantly, praxis is, of course, contextual. What maximizes well-being in one environment may fail in another. Parenting young children, caring for an ill partner, building an organization, or recovering from trauma, each impose different demands. Pangburnian well-being does not apply a single template. It applies a consistent orientation across changing conditions. One common objection claims that this makes the maxim vague or overly subjective, but the alternative is false precision. Praxis cannot be algorithmic because life is not. What Pangburnian praxis offers instead is accountability. Patterns can be evaluated. Outcomes can be examined. Adjustments can be made. Well-being practiced this way becomes visible. It shows up as stability rather than drama. Oh, I found a mistake here. Well-being practice this way becomes visible. It shows up as stability rather than drama. The practice of Pangburnian well-being is not about appearing good. It is about leaving fewer people worse off. So there's a lot of important things to go over here, and the importance of repair is a big one. This is often overlooked, not asked enough of each other. Are we giving ourselves enough time and energy to repair? But go ahead, Perry or Thomas.
Yeah, take one of more or less simple rules of weightlifting is unless you're taking tons of gear and steroids, you really need to let your muscles repair and restore itself. When you lift weights, you're carrying your muscles, literally, your muscle fibers, and therefore you need to let it repair. Otherwise, if you go back to the gym and you hit the same muscle that isn't recovered, you're doing more damage than you are good for yourself.
That's an excellent example of physical praxis. Yeah, for your well-being. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And what was the other thing? Boundaries, maxims. I mean, it's not entirely I mean, you almost could apply the maxim to all cases, even if all cases are going to demand that achieving that maxim takes a different mechanism than the time before. I mean,
Yes.
in the world of change, we can still be the cosmopolitan man and apply this one seemingly universal, not universal that it's infallible, of course. We've been over that ad nauseum, but just universal that you can take your maxim wherever you go in these changing environments. You'll have to figure out how to do it, but the goal remains the same, to maximize well-being.
And that is why it's important, the section on praxis being contextual. We outlined why in there are going to be cases where the action you took to maximize well-being in this one scenario doesn't work in this other one. The difference between parenting your child or caring for an ill partner. These are different worlds of praxis, how you would go about this care in action. Thomas, what do you think about the praxis of well-being?
Oh man, this is one of the most important parts. So repair, you named the main important word. Repair for self and other. We can separate self and other to examine our interdependence. That is what is healthy. Being interdependent, being whole selves, and also being whole societally, if that makes sense, socially. And these things tie to each other. Repair is what keeps us all together and going on so that we can survive. We didn't have this condition of repair since we've grown up on the plains. I don't know, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to each other. But repair is the most important part, because you have to do it for yourself. Things like rest, that's the praxis. And then, like Perry said, and then repair is also necessary the praxis of that is keep up with the people you love in your life. That's one thing. That's an easy way to repair like that. And be adaptable. Realize that cognitive rigidity is the foundation of most human suffering.
Yeah.
The denial of fallibilism and the acceptance of certainty out of fear. And there's no reason for that. We don't have to be scared of being scared about that. There's so much here that I can keep going on, but I'd actually like to hear you say more.
Well, I think if we were to examine our own lives and the people we know personally, how many people do we know that treat repair as if I have time?
Yeah, no, that's no.
It's not treated. It's not treated as an imperative, and that's a big issue. I mean, I have friends of mine who are the same age as me who have young kids who are working themselves to death. They're working, 15 to 18-hour days, 6 days a week. They feel as though they are missing it all, and they are feeling.
I'm so sorry.
No. Go ahead. No. Please.
The money that they want is blinding them to the thing that makes them healthy and feel love. The children, them, their connections. There's paper after paper. I always say this because this is true. There's so much evidence that shows the true meaning that people find in lives, that they say, I'm happy, I'm content, all of this, is from their connections to other people. It's not money. It's not. I mean, we have to use that to survive. Regardless, it's not any of that. It is your connections to others. Obviously, your connection to yourself as well. That's the whole point of interdependence. Remaining the whole self while also being a part of the society, groups, and everything that you are within.
Yeah. Well, and we went over some of that in the psychology of well-being section, but very important to continue to remind ourselves that, money ought to be viewed as a means to an end, and that end should be a purposeful end. You would hope that the work you are putting into is going to great purpose. Now, in these friends I have who have children and they're working themselves to death, I understand the moral romanticism at play and how it is tolerable for them to do so because they imagine the new shoes their children are getting. They imagine the hockey school their children are going to be able to go to now because they put in the extra work. These things are important, but we also need to set boundaries, and which is one of the central features of the praxis section here in the well-being chapter is we just read a section on boundary setting. Boundary setting also means making sure that you aren't just sacrificing sections of your well-being or entire sections, your entire social health section in order to achieve providing an experience to a family member or your kid. And there's good reason for this, why there must be boundaries, because you, as the person you want to be, first of all, we need to recognize that we are all cognitively limited. And if we don't recognize our limitations, listen to our bodies, for example, engage in the maintenance, we will break down and we will run out. And it's just important to recognize what you may be doing to your future. Sometimes the short-term sacrifice is going to be too much to bear, including the things you miss in that short time. So, and I think we're getting to the heart here of a very real world human condition that everyone is tasked with, whether you have kids or not. Most people have very serious responsibilities that cost money. And what we do to relieve those monetary burdens, we do a lot. But we ought not do so much so that we are causing great future damage to these subcategories of our own well-being or those around us. Okay. The ethical implications of well-being. We have a couple sections left here. I think we have three sections left here. If well-being functions as a genuine moral constraint, then it cannot remain ethically neutral. It changes what we are permitted to justify, excuse, or ignore. The Pangburn well-being maxim does not merely recommend kindness or prudence. It redraws the boundaries of moral responsibility. The most immediate implication is that outcomes matter, even when intentions are sincere. Good faith, for example, is not a moral shield against foreseeable harm. A person or institution may act from conviction, tradition, or principle and still violate the well-being maxim if the predictable result is sustained damage to physical, psychological, or social health. Moral seriousness requires willingness to revise when harm becomes visible. One more time. moral seriousness requires willingness to revise when harm becomes visible. Visible meaning detected, demonstrated, not just does the person have a scratch on them. This, by the way, does not collapse ethics into crude consequentialism. Well-being does not ask us to maximize, or Pangburnian well-being does not ask us to maximize abstract totals or justify any means by appealing to ends. It asks something narrower and more demanding. Are the harms imposed necessary, proportionate, and revisable? Are they acknowledged rather than denied? Are those bearing the cost treated as expendable or as morally significant? A second implication concerns moral blame. Because people act under constraint, ignorance, and pressure, Pangburnian ethics resists reflexive moral condemnation. Harmful outcomes often emerge from structural failure rather than individual vice. At the same time, the framework refuses moral innocence when patterns are sustained, despite evidence of damage. Responsibility increases with awareness, power, and proximity. This produces a distinctive moral posture: less outrage, more accountability; less purity signaling, more repair. Another implication concerns moral permission. Some actions that are culturally praised become suspect under the well-being maxim. Chronic overwork, like we've talked about. Heroic self-sacrifice, we talked about that too. Endurance framed as a virtue. Conflict pursued for symbolic victory rather than resolution. When these patterns predictably erode health or fracture communities, they are no longer morally neutral. They are failures of stewardship. And we talked about stewardship early on in this chapter. Stewardship, Thomas gave a great example that if you have a dog, a good way to think about stewardship, you are the steward of that dog. You are to look after that dog. Some actions that attract moral suspicion become ethically defensible. Boundary setting, withdrawal from toxic environments, prioritizing recovery over productivity, revising deeply held commitments in light of harm. Pangburnian well-being treats these not as weaknesses, but as responsibility. So you are responsible to set boundaries within Pangburnian well-being, to withdraw yourself from toxic environments, prioritize recovery. We talked a lot about repair just now with Thomas. The maxim also reshapes how disagreement is handled. If maximizing well-being for those around you is a standing obligation, then humiliating, dehumanizing, or destabilizing others in the name of being right becomes ethically suspect, even when one's beliefs are accurate. Very important in today's political discourse. One more time, the maxim also reshapes how disagreement is handled. If maximizing well-being for those around you is a standing obligation, which it should be, it ought be, then humiliating, dehumanizing, or destabilizing others in the name of being right becomes ethically suspect, even when one's beliefs are accurate. Truth pursued without regard for well-being can become a blunt instrument rather than a moral good. This does not require silence or false harmony. It requires proportionality. Disagreement should aim to clarify, not to crush. The ethical question is not merely whether a claim is correct, but whether the manner and context of its assertion predictably reduce or increase overall stability. Finally, the Pangburn well-being maxim undermines moral absolutism. When suffering is treated as morally necessary, critique is dismissed as weakness often. When harm is reframed as virtue, correction becomes betrayal. Pangburnian ethics refuses this move. No moral vision is exempt from evaluation by its effects on human lives. Ethics under this framework is not about occupying the moral high ground. It's about leaving fewer people damaged in the wake of one's convictions. Okay, anything on the ethical implications here? Specifically on outcome, why outcomes should matter, moral blame, and moral permission.
Yeah, outcomes are extremely important, obviously. You can't just have good intentions and, dust your hands off and say, all right, I've done my moral duty, even if you completely shit the bed. Now, if you do shit the bed, you should revise your whatever reflection that you have on that moral moment. You should be willing to revise, as you said. In the political sphere, we see people not wanting to be wrong more than they want to seek truth, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So they'll die on whatever lousy hill that is, of course, not worth dying on. But yeah, again, to the feedback loop thing between praxis and theory, there's an equal and perhaps identical feedback loop between outcome and the sincerity of your intentions. So both of those things more or less need to be in harmony with the goal of well-being to be a sufficient moral character.
Yeah, very good. The disagreement element is really important. We all face disagreement constantly in our lives. Disagreement with ideas that we detest from competing agents. It's very easy to follow our emotional knee-jerk reactions before our greater moral selves come into contact with those actions and just act out of reflex. But,
real quick on disagreement, it's not always, but a good amount of the time, it will come down to our favorite distinction of all time, which is possibility versus plausibility. One person is going to think that one theory is going to be more plausible than the other from whom they're disagreeing with. And this, you brought it up now a few times, predictability in these episodes. Here's a good point as well. When we're disagreeing about certain things, we can always go to the quote unquote moral facts of what's going on, of what predictably happens when you isolate yourself socially, or you don't repair yourself, or whatever the case may be. So predictability is important when we navigate disagreements with each other, as well as fallibility, of course, and willing to be wrong, which we established was a prerequisite. Fallibilism is more or less a prerequisite for any virtue or philosophical endeavor.
Yeah, we argued. I argued in a fallibilism section near the end that here are the reasons why fallibilism is prior to all other virtues, and it does perform as a constraint on. It should perform as a constraint on all virtues, and actually, descriptively, it does. We are descriptively, by our own nature, fallibilistic, but some are just frantically trying to escape that nature. But how important is fallibilism when it comes to disagreement? How many of you out there who hate Donald Trump are willing to admit that you could be wrong about Donald Trump and any of the instances the Epstein files, the what you believe is moral character to be at its foundations. How many of you are allowing your fallibilism to permeate how you feel when you are faced with disagreement against ideas that you detest? And simply reminding yourself that you are fallibilistic, and you should promote that beautiful aspect of our nature, should take a serious edge off such disagreements, despite the implications of the ideas. This is very hard to do. When we get into the patience chapter, it's funny that when we are moving through these sections in each chapter, little hints at future upcoming Pangburn virtues that are to be discussed are they're alluded to. They're out of necessity, I think. So, reminding yourself of your fallibilism, your fallibilistic nature, should allow you to better harness the virtue of patience. And when we start looking at the symmetry between those two virtues and the virtue of well-being, you'll start to see that when we go out into the real world, you need them working together. Great. Thomas, anything to add on disagreements and moral commissions?
This is the repair part. I just, everything else you said, I agree so deeply I could explode, so I don't want to sound sycophantic, but seriously, I agree extraordinarily deeply. Repair. Disagreement allows us to repair. This literally is why we are alive. You know what I mean? Like if we didn't have repair conditions for disagreement and form that on the tribes, on the plains of Africa, we would be dead. We would not be here. This is the whole point of caring about well-being. If you don't care about well-being, well, then go jump off a cliff. I don't understand. I really, you know what I mean? Like, what's the point, right? I don't even know if there really ever truly has been someone who gives no shits about well-being, because they would just immediately stop breathing. I don't,
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine such an agent. However, we have billions upon billions of agents who claim to only value well-being because of God underneath.
They ask all the time, why do you care about well-being? I don't want to generalize, but I'm saying they as in like a lot of Christians anyway.
Yeah.
They say all the time, why do you care about well-being? Because don't you want to be alive longer so that you can worship God longer and do more things for him on earth? Maybe that's not all Christians, but come on now.
Yes. When we get into the chapter, the final chapter of the book, where I demonstrate that the 6 Pangburn virtues are really for everyone, we get into a bit of, how different really is my arrival at well-being to the process that had the reader arrive to Christianity.
Yes.
I would say that fundamentally we are being led by our sentiments, how we feel about propositions and experiences we are having. So we will get into clarifying how we feel justified in adopting these particular virtues as well in that chapter. Because that's a big question, right? That a lot of religious folks will have is to, my presupposition is the ultimate presupposition, and the ultimate presupposition is God as my moral metric. And he has delivered his moral pronouncements that I am to use for measurement in Scripture. So we'll get into that in that chapter, and whether there are any differences between presupposing God as a moral metric or presupposing well-being as a moral metric. Is there really anything different with regards to process? The answer is no, by the way. But we'll get there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about social and institutional implications of Pangburnian well-being. If well-being is a genuine moral constraint, then it cannot stop at the level of individual conduct. Much of what determines whether people flourish or collapse is not chosen one decision at a time. It is structured into the environments they inhabit. Families, workplaces, schools, media ecosystems, legal systems, and governments all shape the baseline conditions under which well-being is pursued. Pangburnian ethics therefore treats institutions as morally significant, even if they are not moral agents in the ordinary sense. Institutions scale behavior. They can normalize stress, they can reward sacrifice, they can distribute risk, and they can define what kinds of lives are sustainable. When institutional arrangements reliably degrade physical, mental, and social health, they violate the well-being maxim regardless of stated intentions. This has immediate consequences. Systems that depend on chronic exhaustion are ethically suspect. I can think of some countries that rely on chronic exhaustion that are ethically suspect. Can you think of businesses that rely on chronic exhaustion that are ethically suspect? Institutions that...
At some point, really quickly, at some point, are you going to cover the grind that institutions does to the human race?
Oh yeah, we can talk about that in this section for sure.
Take your time. Take your time.
Institutions that demand constant availability, they normalize burnout, or treat human beings as interchangeable resources. They externalize harm and call it efficiency. Pangburnian well-being refuses this rebranding. If an institution functions only by consuming the health of the people within it, it is not morally neutral. It is extractive. If an institution functions only by consuming the health of the people within it, that's not morally neutral. It is extractive. It is extracting human health. The same applies to informational institutions. Media environments that reward outrage, certainty signaling, and moral preference degrade social health by amplifying fear and distrust. Even when the content is factually correct, the cumulative effect may still undermine well-being. This gets to a thing where some people are like, well, I'm just going to say the facts and the truth, and I don't care how it makes people feel. That is counter to Pangburnian well-being. You ought care for the well-being of those around you. If someone who comes into contact with your communication, that should be part of your calculus. The maxim demands attention not only to truth, but how truth is delivered and metabolized by real human nervous systems. Political and legal institutions pose a further challenge. Collective decisions inevitably impose costs. Pangburnian well-being does not deny this. It demands proportionality, transparency, and revisability. Policies justified in the name of the common good must remain open to correction when they produce must remain open to correction. Sorry, I had a little typo there. Certainty-driven governance is brittle governance. A familiar objection is that institutions cannot function without firmness and authority. Constant revision, it is said, undermines trust. Pangburnian ethics answers that trust is not built by infallibility, but by responsiveness. Institutions that admit uncertainty and demonstrate willingness to repair damage maintain legitimacy far longer than those that project certainty and suppress critique. Another objection claims that prioritizing well-being invites paternalism. If institutions are tasked with promoting well-being, will they not overreach? This concern is actually well-founded. Pangburnian well-being, therefore, operates as a constraint, not a mandate. Institutions are not authorized to impose a single vision of flourishing. They are constrained from enforcing arrangements that predictably damage human functioning. So, one more time. In my view, institutions are not authorized to impose a single vision of flourishing. They are constrained from enforcing arrangements that predictably damage human functioning, or physical, mental, and social health. This distinction matters. A well-being constraint limits harm without dictating life plans. It preserves pluralism while rejecting cruelty. And it reserves pluralism because we're just talking about those facts about well-being that affect all of us, those physical, mental, and social facts. It allows disagreement about values while maintaining shared limits on damage. Social and institutional well-being also feeds back into individual moral capacity. People who live under conditions of chronic insecurity, mistrust, or instability are less able to regulate themselves, care for others, or revise beliefs responsibly. Institutions that protect well-being therefore expand moral agency downstream. Those that erode it shrink the moral space available to everyone. The Pangburn well-being maxim thus applies upward as well as outward. It governs not only how individuals live, but how systems justify themselves. Institutions exist to serve human lives, not outlast them. Very important. Institutions exist to serve human lives, not to outlast them. Now, Thomas, you've been hypercritical of institutions and how society runs, the effects of that on well-being. I remember you and I have talked about this probably as early as from the first time we ever had conversations.
2020. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about the social and institutional implications of well-being, where we're at now, what you see in the world now, and how much work you think we need to do in that regard.
This is one of the most important things by far. The grind, and I use that as a metaphor, because it does grind us into dust. And this goes back to evolution. We did not evolve to get up and go and do work every day in a structured way like this, but let's not even focus on that point. Let's focus on what it does. So we have about 170 hours in a week. You sleep 56 to 60, and you maybe even more than that sometimes, and you work 40, and you're home maybe 35, 40. Okay, that's most people in the United States. So half the time you're awake, you're at a place that may seem nice as a veneer. Oh, they're nice to me when I come here and everything. I'm not saying that the people are not nice, but everybody is socially enculturated to be like, if you get fired because you have any issues whatsoever, um, you're just screwed. Now in America, you can just jump right back into another job, right? It's easy to do that if you're not completely, destroyed mentally, physically, and all that stuff. But what it does is it shows, hey, during the day, you're just a number. You're not really a part of any tribe. I'm not, in group, out group, anything. You're not a part of anything. You're just, it's you and your family versus the world, and you have some friends. It is utterly destructive, the way that we have built most of the world. I know there's places around the world that do not live this way, and there's smaller groups that don't live. But on average, the grind that I talk about destroys quote unquote human souls. It really does, because we don't get that secure attachment that we need. We don't, if you went to work and your HR manager was like, we're not going to let anything happen to you. If something happens, we'll take care of you because you're here giving your time a thing, right? But it all comes down to money, efficiency. The company's got to make money. You become an efficient mechanism. And we are not just efficient mechanisms. We are also organic, feeling, thinking, artistic systems. And yeah, we put ourselves. I mean, hell, even I do. Everybody puts themselves into this society, into this grind, because we have to live, And I'm not saying that we can't give back to society. Obviously, we all have to do our part, but we kill ourselves to make productivity, and that is not healthy for humans. And I can show the data on this.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And are so many of us human beings in general not trying to escape this grind?
Yeah.
Like, I think I just, in the conversations I have with people, so many of them just dream of escaping the grind, being able to work for themselves, not be on someone else's schedule. I feel like I have escaped the grind. I'm not part of
escape.
Yeah, and I think you have too.
But mine was accidental. I mean, I'm bipolar type 1, and I went through a lot, and then I got on the right medication, and now that's not an issue. You know what I mean? So, shit, I forgot what I was saying. What did you just say? Please get me back.
Well, escaping the grind, and you did it by accident. Yeah.
Yes, I did by accident because I'm on disability now. So, I try to fallibly live better every day and learn from my mistakes the day previous. It's pretty much the foundation of it. And seek higher and better well-being for everyone that is in my life, myself, everything else. I think that is the wise, fallible, honest, and loving way to live. And that's the one that I choose. But yeah, I have escaped the grind. Obviously, I have to still have money to eat and things like that. I am lucky to have the friends and family that I do. I mean, there's no difference between them to me, but I am lucky for that. And I nurture that because that's important in life, and this is what we're supposed to do as humans. This is what we ought to do.
So this grind, and we'll bring Perry in, but I think it's I remember being a part of what I would consider the grind, and then what it felt like to be divorced from it, and there was an overwhelming sense of, oh, I get to live my own life now. Even though at that time I wouldn't even, it wasn't articulable to me, but thinking about that, thinking about this escapism that's going on, and perhaps that is the fiery engine that builds us to the level of productivity we are at today, let's say technologically, industrially. Is it all worth it? Is it all conducive to what we are fundamentally at our core? I would say that this level of rampant production. We perhaps in many cases are at our peak, and maybe that's just when we start moving and having ideas and needing to automate much of what we feel we need. And then, the result of that hopefully would be more time and energy to dedicate towards your physical, mental, and social health. Go ahead, Perry.
Amazon.
Yes.
So they're not entirely extrapolative or extractive, whatever that adjective is that you used.
Extractive.
They'll pay you.
Exploitative.
Exploitative's another way. I used extractive,
Yeah.
but yeah.
They'll give you health benefits so that when they really milk you enough and work you to the bone and you become sick from it, they'll have some health insurance for you. And so, that's not entirely what you said was they work you in cost of your own well-being or something like that, or consumes your health.
Consuming the health
Right.
of the people within their system.
Yes.
So that's called slavery when it's done entirely, where it's like that's all it's
When
doing.
it's done
is just
explicit,
consuming.
explicitly without any return to the individual.
Right.
The difference between slavery here is that people, in some cases make fantastic livings that allows them to, make their dreams come true, materialistically, and also which trickles down into making their kids' dreams come true. We all love the Nintendo 64. I hope the best system ever made. No, So there's a difference there. There's an explicit arrangement, one-sided with slavery that isn't there for these kinds of relationships. But yeah.
It's really important. This is the really important part, and I wanted to say to Barry, if the people, tribes, right? I'm not saying that tribalism is good. I'm just saying the way that we operate as humans is that if the group that we're in that allows us our subsistence, like work, food, things like that, is not just taken away from us because we can't perform, right? We get sick. We have problems. We have mental and physical and social issues that cause us problems on our productivity day to day. It happens to everyone, happens to me, happens to Travis, happens to everybody, right? It is a human thing. But like I said about the HR earlier, your HR, when you have a serious problem, you're getting fired. You are, period, right? And I'm not saying we should put up with raping at work, I'm not saying that. You have to be productive and you have to be willing to be.
Oh, come on, be a little open-minded, Thomas.
I had to
be a little lighthearted with the rape, man. Come on.
Yeah, I had to throw a look. Come on, let's throw just a touch of rape, a smidge.
Yeah.
But seriously, I'm not saying that we, there's a balance here. You don't have to. I'm just saying, think about it rationally and have a heart. There is a reason why we exist this way is because we should. The reason why there's so many homeless and all this stuff is because we just shirk off. That is the efficiency culture of high technology. And I'm hoping that social ethics will move from that. And not speaking against AI or technology or quantum computing, I'm all for that. But when it comes to pushing humans to be more productive for the hell of it, no, I want none of that.
Yeah, so a institution cannot be good and feasting off the health extraction of its people. The institution must be actively invested in maximizing the well-being of those within its system. And that scales all the way up to political leadership. It can't be simply extracting the health of its people for gain. The health needs to be maintained.
you brought up proportionality as well. So these institutions I guess that's what proportionality more or less would be, is substituting whatever work that they put in and giving back whatever means of well-being. I said the healthcare thing facetiously, but that's huge. That's a great way to do it. Financially, obviously, is what many people would also look to, but
Yeah.
there's the environment that you're in on a day-to-day basis needs to be in a way that conduces to maximizing your well-being. The HR or the other resourcing that may be within a group. If someone has some mental disability or something, like, I guess that's healthcare, but there's ways that institutions could plausibly help with the workers' well-being that aren't being done currently.
Yeah.
And I think that what you said earlier, much of your project here is seeing what's wrong in the real world. People aren't fallible. People aren't seeking well-being. They are heavy-hearted, and you see these things, and that's why you create these virtues. So we
Right.
definitely see a lack of maximizing well-being in the political sphere, institutionally, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. Great, Perry. And I'm also excited by when I see institutions taking this on, and the reports and studies that are done in particular sectors when they score really high with regards to well-being standards and resources available. I love that. That is the light. And there's a lot of it going on. And I realize that it's inevitable that human beings will cry out when their health is being extracted for profit, let's say. They cry out to say, you can't have my health. I'm going to work for you, but you can't steal my health for profit. I'm going to put in my time. I'm going to work hard for you. I'm going to do my job well, but you can't extract my health. You need to maintain it. And I think that is the arrow, the direction humanity moves, albeit we're in a rampant stage of development here. And I just worry of those cases where this is not happening. There's not enough attention. So we're thinking about well-being on a very large scale. And of course, we can take this all the way up to analyzing the well-being outcomes of particular countries. There are countries in Africa, for example. Well, the well-being outcomes of citizens are astonishingly low. If you guys have anything else to say, please do. But I want to read some data into the record here.
I would either rather hear from you or Perry, so I'm good.
I'm good. Go ahead.
Everyone listening, we are going to be taking a couple questions here soon. We got one more section after this. But I wanted to grab this information. Central African Republic.
The capital is Bangui, by the way.
Yeah, so obviously South Sudan, lowest or near lowest HDI. Central African Republic. That's the very, very weak state institutions, ongoing violence, very poor access to healthcare and education. South Sudan suffers from the chronic civil conflict. That's a big one. Food insecurity. Somalia, Chad, Niger. Here are some lesser known. Burundi, often ranked among the least happy countries in the world, political instability and deep, deep poverty. So it's just, there are entire countries of people suffering with levels of well-being that are just unacceptable to me as a moral well-beingist, and we got to do more. We have very rich nations around the world that are helping. But my question is always like, we ought be maximizing. This is why the maxim tells you to maximize. That's just a continuous operation. It's not a project that ends once you reach the finish line. There is no end. So, yeah, we got to do more. Okay, a closing synthesis here, and then we'll take some questions. If ever anyone wants to raise their hand, we can bring them up for some questions. So the closing synthesis here, well-being as moral stewardship under constraint. Pangburnian well-being does not begin with ideals. It begins with people, real bodies, real minds, real relationships. It begins with the recognition that human lives are fragile systems operating under pressure, that moral seriousness must be calibrated to that reality rather than imposed in defiance of it. The well-being maxim, maximize well-being for yourself and those around you, is not an instruction to chase happiness or engineer perfection. It is a refusal to normalize damage. It is a demand that moral conviction remain accountable to consequences. It asks whether a way of living is making human lives more stable or more fragile over time. Across this chapter, well-being has been situated where it belongs, not as a single theory among rivals, but as a constraint that all moral reasoning must respect. Not as a private feeling, but as a public responsibility. Not as an endpoint, but as an enabling condition for an ethical life that hopes to endure. The structure of Pangburnian well-being makes this explicit. Physical, mental, and social health are not optional add-ons to morality. They are the infrastructure that allows moral agency to function at all. When one collapses, the others follow. When all three are protected, moral disagreement can occur without human collapse. Praxis grounds this framework in action. Attention to patterns, calibration rather than intensity, boundaries that preserve capacity, repair that restores trust. None of this is glamorous. None of it confers moral prestige, but it is precisely the unromantic seriousness that prevents ethical life from turning performative. Ethically, the well-being maxim redraws the lines of justification. Sincere harm is still harm. Noble narratives do not erase damage. Virtues that predictably erode human functioning lose their moral authority, no matter how culturally admired they may be. At the same time, well-being ethics refuses cruelty. It recognizes unequal starting points, unequal burdens, and unequal room to maneuver. Responsibility is real, but it is never abstracted from constraint. Socially and institutionally, like we just talked about, well-being scales upwards. Systems are not excused by intention or tradition. They are evaluated by what they reliably produce in human lives. Institutions exist to serve people, not to consume them. Authority that cannot revise in response to harm eventually forfeits legitimacy. Finally, well-being is prior to other virtues because it enables them. Things like courage without well-being becomes recklessness. Honesty without well-being becomes cruelty. Compassion without well-being becomes depletion. Well-being does not replace these virtues. It keeps them human. Remember, it is a constraint, a necessary constraint. If someone says, my virtue is honor, and their honor lacks a consideration or care for the well-being of the virtue holder or those around them, I would say that that is a bad virtue. It's not constrained by the facts of our well-being. Throughout all of this chapter, fallibilism remains the governing epistemic posture. We do not know with certainty what will maximize well-being in every case. We act under uncertainty. We test, we revise, we repair. Moral seriousness does not require omniscience. It requires responsibility. Pangburnian well-being is therefore not a moral finish line. It is a way of holding life. It is stewardship rather than domination, maintenance rather than martyrdom. Care under constraint, not purity, not certainty, but responsibility lived honestly in a world that can be made better or worse by how seriously we take the health of human lives. That is the moral quest. Okay, guys, on synthesis, kind of summarizing the chapter here. What do you guys think?
You caught me leaning back in the chair. I think it's awesome. I mean, literally constraint-based ethics, way to be, baby.
Yeah, I think I'll say something about constraint-based ethics. For any Christian out there, or Muslim, or Hindu, or anyone, look deeply within your religions to see if well-being, the preservation of well-being, is in fact a constraint. Now, I know it's obvious to look at, let's say, the Old Testament and point to the treatment of homosexuality, and we can say with great example there that the constraint and well-being protection of that particular subject is violated. But see if there are contradictions to that. You know, perhaps in the New Testament you believe that Jesus, in one way or another, ordered the constraint of well-being onto moral prescriptions. Perry, any final thoughts?
No, nothing that I haven't already said. Quite a bit for me to, again, my mental ATP is a little low today, so I'll have to meditate on much that's been said. But, you know, I mean, well-being is in low supply but high demand, I think is the right way to say that. Could be a lot more of it being produced by institutions as well as individuals. And I hope that the good word gets out to those institutions and people that need it.
Great. Let's take Isabel up here. They seem quite frantic in the chat to get up and ask a question or make a statement. Go ahead, Isabel.
Hello, Travis. As always, very good day to you and You've always been a good friend of mine.
Good day, Isabel. What do you have for us?
I was listening to your what you said and everything that you said about healthcare and and everything. So I work for Optim Bank. You know that. Um, today I had a customer that I spoke to, and apparently she called up United Healthcare a couple of times and never got a resolution. I managed to get a resolution on the call itself. Um, you spoke about a lot of things, a lot of things. Um, I would say in the larger aspect of things that we as human beings we are not all capable of uh, what I'm trying to say is that um, so I actually want to gather my thoughts.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to move you to the audience for now. Isabel, feel free to gather your thoughts. Feel free to also pin us in the philosophy tab or the morality tab, and we can also talk over text if that's easier for you. Does anyone else have a question in the room? If they want, please raise your hand. If not, it looks like we're good. If Thomas or Perry, if you don't have any final words on well-being, then yeah, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Wonderful.
Yeah, no, I hope you guys enjoyed this this chapter. It's a big one, but when we're talking about an ultimate, for maybe lack of a better term, constraint on goodness, we're talking about something very serious here. If you want to be good in the world, you need to consider your own physical, mental, and social health, and the same for those around you. And one thing to point out is that we talked about earlier in the chapter, but those around you are going to be people that you interact with one way or another. This could be in a video you post or share on Twitter or X. This could be something you say to someone you don't even know that you're walking down the street, something you say to them. In those situations, I'm saying you should be maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you. You should be caring about, even if they're strangers, even if you're posting on social media and you're like, well, if they don't like what I'm posting, they can just not look at it or whatever. You still have a responsibility to care for others' well-being that you are affecting. That doesn't mean you can't live a lighthearted life and like joking around and playing around with people, and sometimes people will be offended. But you should always be caring about your own physical, mental, and social health and those around you who you affect. That's the main purpose of the maxim, the demand of you, the challenge. I really do think that's where the good life is hidden. I think all the good that we find in all the world religions, whenever we find some good there, it's because it's having a positive effect on the physical, mental, or social health of the subjects involved. So, thank you for joining me today. Next week for study time, we are going to be moving to Chapter 3. And Chapter 3 directly relates to the Pangburn Universe here on Discord, because communication, which is the virtue, also holds the maxim that good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. That maxim has been the root of what governs communication in the Pangburn universe and on the Pangburn stage. So it's a really big topic coming up that directly relates to all of the things we are best known for at Pangburn. So I hope you join us next Friday. Always going to be 7 p.m. Eastern time here on Discord. And these videos will later be released on the Pangburn YouTube channel. But Perry and Thomas, thank you so much. You guys are the best. And
Always.
yeah.
I would not be just in denying your request. So thank you.
I will.
Love
I
you,
will.
bud. This was
I love you. I love you guys. I will righteously kill you if you're not there, Perry. So there.
That's fair enough. That's proportioned.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Let art and science inspire.